We are live, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. It's now 1 minute past 7, so we're going to get this evening's Children's Services and Overview and Scrutiny Committee underway. I would just firstly like to remind everyone that we are being recorded, being live streamed, and for members of the public that wish to watch, that can be found on the council's website. So moving on, we've got apologies for absence. I've not received any apologies. Wendy, have you?
No, there's been no apologies, Chair.
Fantastic. The next item is items of urgent business. I've not received any items. I don't think Democratic Services has either. So we'll move on to item 3, declaration of interest. Do we have any declaration of interests? Linda?
I need to declare that I work for Thurrock Thurrock Special Needs Service.
Okay, thank you, Linda. It doesn't look as though we have any further declarations of interest, so we'll get to the first report, which is the pupil place plan update. And Sarah, I think this is yourself presenting this.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Anderson. This report is something that we do on an annual basis. So we do a pupil place plan, we review it. It gives us our forecasted numbers and identifies where we might need to increase capacity in our primary and secondary schools. The recommendation is for Overview and Scrutiny Committee to review the pupil place plan, recognising the additional school places that we will require going forward, and that will be picked up in my next report under the School Capital Programme. So basically what we do is we review, as I said, on an annual basis, we review all of our pupil forecasts. We use live birth data that we get from the Office of National Statistics, and we feed that in amongst other data, and all of the areas that we cover are picked up in the pupil place plan, which is attached as an appendix. And we'll sort of talk through that. I have a very short presentation that will take you through some of the key areas and some of the highlight areas for us. So what I would say is that all of our schools, all pretty much are academies now. We have one more primary that's due to convert on the 1st of December, and then we'll be left with one secondary voluntary aided school left. All of the rest are academies. So this is very much, when we look at increasing any capacity in schools, it's very much on a partnership basis. It's not something that where they were community schools before, we were able to kind of direct them to increase and take bold classes. What I would say is that, you know, the birth rate has been increasing in Thurrock. This year is our biggest intake, and you'll see that when we go through the slides. And it's very difficult to forecast any of that. So although we know what the birth rate is, we know what's coming through, what we actually can't plan for is any additional families that move into the borough and any additional children that we then have to find school places for. So it is very much forecasted. It's very difficult. It's very much a moving picture. We constantly review regularly. So we have a pupil place planning meeting every 4 weeks. That takes place with internal colleagues and includes transport, highways, admissions, which is in my service area. And we continually look at the numbers coming through and where we are sort of running out of, you know, places in all year groups. And that's how we then, you know, get to sometimes having to put some bold classes in. We've got a number of planning areas. So we have 5 for primary. That's the Aveley, Ockenden, Purfleet. Then we have the Greys, Tilt and Tilbury, and then Corringham and Stamford, and then the rural areas. So they're all made up of different planning areas with schools in those areas. And then in our secondary sector, we just have West Central and the East areas that we sort of think about when we're planning pupil places. You will also be aware that we have been successful in some free school bids, which is helping with our capacity. So in particular, the Thames Park and Orsett Heath secondary schools that opened in their temporary accommodation from this September. We also have Treetop Special School coming online, and some temporary accommodation has already been opened there, with some further accommodation due to open early next year. And then in addition to that, we have a primary school, 2 form-entry primary school coming in the Aveley-Ockenden area. So when we get to the pupil place plan, I'll talk about some of the highlighted areas that if you've managed to have a look at that plan, you'll see there's some areas that are quite red that need some focus. I think that's probably pretty much, how we run our pupil place plan, and I think it's really important for, to share with the committee how we get to school capital programme, how we get to building in additional capacity, and where we put and why we put old classes in. So I think if we scroll down, I'm just going to go now to a couple of areas on the pupil place plan, if I may. And I'm going to go firstly to page, it will be 22, I think, of your document. And that's looking at the Aveley, Ockenden and Purfleet areas, and all of the schools that are in that planning area. You'll see there's some red in particular. So that's telling us that by the time we get to September 23 and September 24, actually we won't have enough places in that area. So the hope is that the free school will come, the Reach 2 primary free school will come online by then. But if not, and we don't know what the programme is, as yet, not a definitive programme, we will need to do some work, within our schools in partnership. If we then look to our next area where we have a lot of red is in Tilbury, and you'll see both reception and across the whole school forecast, there are some very big red areas there for us. So that's an area that we are already looking at how we can manage and build in some capacity within those schools. So we're having those conversations at the moment. In our Corringham and Stanford area, we're looking at, again, we've got some red areas, and we're looking at a school in particular, and I'll pick that up again when we come to the school capital report, because we're looking at, to both Tilbury and Stanford and Corringham. And then in our rural areas, they're very small schools. So although they're very red, and actually there's a need for capacity, and there has been some housing development around there, those schools are on quite small sites, which doesn't give us a lot of opportunity to extend those schools. It's very difficult in those areas. What I would say is when we move on through the plan to the secondary, there's lots of red areas, but what I would say is because we've got the two new free schools coming online, actually, although those areas are red at the moment, when we revise our plan, which we've started for the next year, those areas won't be red because we will have more capacity in the secondary sector. So I just wanted to be clear, although that you might look at that now and think, actually, we've got some issues there. Actually, we won't have come next year. And then if I move you just down to the presentation, there's just a few slides. The first slide will show you just the birth rate data over the last 10 years. You can see how it's kind of, in 2010, it's a high birth rate. If we get to 2012, 13, it sort of dips a little bit. And this year, obviously 2015 birth data is this year's intake is the highest that we've ever had. Although it dips a little bit again next year, that this is just based on birth data. So that doesn't include any children or families moving into the borough. So that's just the birth data. So it just gives you an idea about, what sort of happened over the last 10 years and what's happening going forward. And then if we move to slide 3, so that's the second slide, you can see that the number of live births for 2015-16, for example, 2,505, but actually the number of children we took into reception and admitted on roll was 2,547. And then the next slide just gives you an idea by planning area visually where our kind of key areas are. So Grays, that's our central area. Tilbury and Aby Ockenden, again, are quite high areas for, you know, birth rate, for where we see, you know, high numbers of births in those planning areas. The next slide after that just gives you an idea about how we compare to our statistical neighbours. So you can see that actually the pupil increase in Thurrock has been quite high compared to other statistical neighbours. And then again on the next slide, our geographical neighbours, we are actually in line with Barking and Dagenham, but again quite high with pupil increases into the borough since 2019 to 2000 and since 2013 to 2019. And then the last page is just really a summary of the pupil place plan. It just gives you an idea. So if you look at the column that says PAM, that's our pupil admission number. So in the primary, we have 17,724 available places across all of our primary schools. And then if you look at our secondary, 11,160 total places available. So we don't have as many secondary places for our primary to then move into. But obviously we do have the new 2 free schools coming. So that will, you know, help and give us capacity. That's the end of that report. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you. The question I wanted to ask was regarding the area. In the report, you mentioned that. Sorry, I don't know.
I can't quite hear you.
I was wondering if we knew whose feet. I'm getting a lot of feedback. I don't know. I'll carry on though. I'll carry on. Like I was saying, in the report when you were talking about Tilbury, you mentioned that we were in discussions because obviously that area on this report is the reddest. I was wondering if you could give any kind of flavour or sense of remedies being discussed in those discussions you referred to.
Thank you. So you'll notice from most of the schools in the Tilbury area are part of the Gateway Learning community of schools. So we are in communication with them about what the possibilities are in terms of, you know, whether that's bulge classes, expansion, and, you know, we are at very early stages of the conversation with those schools to look at, because there are a number of factors that we look at. And land being one of them, you know, space available to be able to do any expansion work in, you know, and that's at any schools that we talk to and work in partnership with.
Okay, thank you. I can see Councillor Muldowney has the hand raised. Councillor Muldowney?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sarah, for this report. Thank you. It's really interesting to see how you make the calculation for what school places we're going to need in primary and secondary, and it was very easy to see that it's a combination of obviously a higher birth rate that's moving through our primary schools at the moment and about to hit our secondary schools, but also the in-year any developments, extra children that come where we have housing developments, and also people who move into the neighbourhood and their children need school places within the year. One thing I just wanted to challenge for accuracy is on page 7, and I know we did talk about this briefly when we had our phone call, but 3.8 says that 36% of the people arrived in Thurrock from other parts of the country, meaning that 64% arrived from outside of the country. And I wondered, where was the data to support that? Because on page 39, it gives figures for children arriving from abroad and from elsewhere in the UK. and last year it was 191 out of 1,288 overall, which I make around 14.2%. Because I think this is in the pupil place plan document as well. So I just want to make sure that the information that we're sending out is accurate.
Yes, thank you. And I know we did discuss this in the week, and I think what I probably would like to clarify on that is the 36% are from families that moved to England and moved to Thurrock, and the rest of it is made up from families that move within Thurrock.
Right. Well, but where is the 36% coming from though? Because last year it was 14.2%.
So yeah, so what I would say is
And the year before that it was 24%, and the year before that it was 22%. So
what we've, yeah, thank you. So when we write the plan, the plan was produced quite some time ago now. Actually, it was published in the summer. So we start working on it about this time every year. So the data, but what we then use is the most up-to-date data of what we know of the families that are moving in. So it will be different to what is in the plan now, because actually we would have updated that data. And we would have looked at all of the numbers of families moving into Thurrock and those that are moving around. So we had around 3,478, I think, that were moved to England, moved to Thurrock.
But in which year?
In the last year, in the last academic year. What I can do is go back.
So what is the table on page 39 saying then? Because it doesn't say that. It doesn't give anywhere near those figures. It's in 3 figures and not 4 figures for any of the years since 2013, 2014.
Let me go back to that page. I think when we did this, we would have updated the data. What I can do for members is go back and look at when we did the data for that, for the report, for the pupil place plan, and for now, and come back with a clarification for you.
Yeah, can it be, because the pupil place plan is already out in the public domain, isn't it, and being used by people. So I think, and the same data is in there. So it means that we're looking at data that isn't correct. So if you could clarify that, what the actual figures are, because as far as I can see, we haven't got total figures for this year, obviously, for 2009, or have we got total figures for 2019-20? Yeah, I suppose we will have. That's like 14.2%, but even so, that data's round the wrong way, isn't it?
What I'll do is I'll clarify and come back to members, committee members for that.
Okay, thank you for that, Sarah. If you can take that action away and provide an update to members, that would be great. Councillor Donny, do you want to come back and talk? Your hand's still up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I thought it was a good report overall, and it was good to be able to see where the pressure is building up in the system. And I think the next report that follows will obviously be talking about what the plans are to address that. Obviously, we've got these big primary numbers that are moving through into secondary school, so that's going to be a big area to address. And it was very easy to see from the report where those pressures were. So I would support this coming back as an annual report to committee, if that's the plan. One thing I did want to ask a bit more about is on page 45. So it's interesting to read that we've got 2 new primary inclusion bases. I just would have liked a little more detail there. Are they fully subscribed? And what is the extent of exclusion issues that we've got in Thurrock? Are we actually meeting? Is that enough to meet the need, or is that an area that we need to look at? That was my other question.
I think Michelle might want to come in on this one. Michelle?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Moldoni. I mean, you're absolutely right. We do a lot of work, don't we, around the SEND and what we're doing around our SEND learners and our inclusion units. So what we're looking at is doing some work around some sort of predictive indicators around have we got enough places. Clearly, at the moment, exclusions have remained relatively low for this term. I say that with a bit of couching, Councillor, because I've just had a couple come through today, so I'm always nervous when I say, because something can happen, sort of, as we know, quite quickly. But what I have recognised is that, you know, in respect to schools coming back after COVID, keeping children in, they have done a really good job on that, but we do need to keep monitoring that. And I think what we will do, it's a good point actually, because I think what we probably need to do is give a little bit more detail in the report next time, Sarah, around those specific sort of like inclusion units, resource bases, those specialist provision that we're putting in place for our children with additional needs, whatever they might be. So I think it's a good point, well made. Thank you, Councillor Moldoni.
Thank you,
Michelle,
Michelle.
can you tell us? Sorry, can you tell us we are actually? I mean, last year did we meet the need in terms of inclusion places?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did meet the need last year. So, but we have to keep monitoring it very closely, Councillor. So, yes, we did meet the need last year. Those spaces are very well used. Again, I think it's probably worth saying actually that part of the real sort of benefit around Thurrock is the partnership working. The partnership working with our schools and the fact that they are prepared to support us with these inclusion bases, because if we didn't have these, Councillor, we would have to find alternative education for these children, which in the main would be outside of the local authority. So, you know, the vision to keep our children and young people in the local authority, the partnership arrangements with schools, I think have been really positive and has enabled us to develop those resource bases. But I'm picking up a theme here, Councillor, so I think probably we'll pick some of that up in some of our reports sort of going forward so that we can give committee reassurance on that.
Yeah, that would certainly be welcome, Michelle, if going forward we could get that data. I noticed Councillor Smith, you raised your hand a little while ago. Would you like to comment, question?
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you, Sarah. I think the report's lovely. I like the way it's set out. It's lovely to read. My question is just, is there a contingency plan for pupils who arrive in Thurrock when we've got no school places? You know, do they then have to go outside of the authority, or do we have a partnership with another local authority, or what do we do then? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. No, we want to keep all of our children in Thurrock. And actually what we do is we look at all of our schools, and, you know, I pretty much, you know, along with Michelle and Sheila, already know where we've got possibilities to expand, to put bulge classes, because we would have had very early conversations. We know where there are schools that could potentially, you know, put some temporary units on their classroom. And it's very much, as I'm sure Michelle would agree, you know, we continually, so not only do we have our 4 weekly meetings, but from those meetings, we are constantly looking at the numbers of children. And we are, you know, lucky in the respect that, you know, we have a great relationship with all of our primary and secondary schools. And, you know, they go above and beyond to help us on a number of occasions, particularly, I would say, in reception this year, actually, we had to open up some additional bulge classes where children had moved into the borough, and we were not able to plan for that in advance. So it was very kind of last minute. And, you know, we have open consultation meetings with primary schools in all of, you know, with all of those schools in a particular planning area where we have the need. But of course, you know, we don't know what we need until those children arrive. So it is very, very difficult. But what I would say is that actually our schools have been amazing in supporting us.
Councillor Smith, would you like to come back on that? No.
Thank you. That's excellent.
Thank you.
Michelle, I don't know if it was from the previous question, but I noticed you still have your hand up. Would you comment on that.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Apologies.
Rocanade.
Thank you very much. I was going to ask a question about the bulge, the primary school and having to add bulge classes. And some of these questions have been picked up because I wanted to ask if currently we have our children placed outside the borough because we cannot have them all together in Thurrock. But then I would ask, because that is under normal situation, but in the current situation where you have believe classes have to be spaced out or something, because of COVID, how are we managing if we are having tight pressure in primary school now? So how are we managing to fit in children in primary schools?
I think what I would say is that the schools are amazing, and actually the risk assessments and the work that they have undertaken to rearrange their classrooms to ensure that all the children fit and they are managing their bubbles. They are able to help. And if we can't offer a child their nearest, or the school that may be the closest to the home address, we've been able to offer the next nearest school. So we have been in a position where we've been able to offer all children a school place at the moment.
Councillor Rocanade, would you like to come back on? You're on mute, Councillor Rocanade.
Oh, sorry. I just want to sort of generally say thank you for the report and the attachment. I don't know if it's yours, because we have the two appendixes. I have two appendices in my report, and I don't think it's necessary because it's the same report. If somebody can pick that up, I don't know if it's the Democratic Services. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I know what you're talking about, Councillor Rocanade. We have the same report for two items. Wendy, I can't see any further hands on my screen. Are any other questions?
Councillor Smith's hand's up.
Oh, I think that's
Old hand.
Oh, okay. Sally Kawaja's hand's up now.
Sally.
Hello. My question is, I don't know if you can really answer this at this stage, but do we have a lot of families in Thurrock that have children that are unable to attend the same school due to spacing, where they've got siblings have to be separated across the borough?
I can't answer that question without looking at the applications. But what we are trying to do is place children in, with their siblings as much as we possibly can, particularly where that's part of the school's admissions criteria. So we absolutely do that. And sometimes parents will ask to stay on a school's waiting list until a place. We may be able to offer one child and not another. Or we are able to, we may be in a position to offer maybe not the very local school, but somewhere close, that's close by, or an alternative school that could then take both siblings.
Okay. Is that becoming more of a problem where we're getting more people moving into the borough that may have a number of children, siblings similar age that need to go to the same school?
It's always a problem with school admissions, I would say, trying to manage the number of applications. We receive lots of in-year applications, and we still are receiving applications now, but we manage that the best that we can, and we offer as many school places as we can.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Sally. I can't see any further hands. The only further comment I'd have, Sarah, is it was good to hear you talk about the integrated approach. Takes this issue, with meetings and transport is involved, etc., etc. That approach was here. With that, I'm happy to go to recommendations. Sally, you've just raised your hand again.
Yeah, it's only one little point. Have you fed that back to schools? How grateful and how much you appreciate their support and that they go above and beyond? Is that do the schools realise that you do really appreciate everything they do? I'm sure you probably do, but I think we do need to note that definitely during the COVID restrictions, to add a couple of more children in is actually a big thing when you've got very big space constraints due to all the COVID restrictions. So I just felt it was really important that we do actually turn around to our schools and say, actually, we really value what you are doing for the children in Thurrock and helping them get educated and not have to travel out of the borough.
Yeah, Michelle.
I mean, just to give some reassurance on that, I absolutely agree. It's really important, and it's about how we work in Thurrock. Actually, it's about that partnership approach. Both Sheila and myself are in regular contact with heads. I mean, I've done a couple of calls to heads today, sort of talking through some issues. Sarah's in regular contact with all the heads. So I think that partnership, Sally, is absolutely critical. So, and I think you're absolutely right. Given what schools have been dealing with, it's of course right that we say and we recognise all of the hard work, and actually that's right across the system, isn't it, Sally? Because it's not just about the head teacher, it's about everybody in the school that have pulled together to make sure that our children, our young people can access their educational offers. So we'll certainly feed that back from committee as well, Sally. We'll say that committee were keen that we fed that back as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay. I will move to the recommendation then, and it reads. Overview and Scrutiny Committee is asked to review the PPP, recognising the additional school places that will be required going forward. So we've done that. Is everyone agreed? Yeah. Okay. I'm happy to move on then. The next one is Sarah again, I think, with the schools capital programme update that can be found on page 65.
Thank you, Chair. This report really leads quite nicely on from the previous one. So the pupil place plan kind of identifies where the need is, and then the school capital programme is a report that we do annually. Actually, we do an update, and that kind of follows the pupil place plan really, and following what needs we have. So the recommendations for this report is for overview and scrutiny to support the recommendation to Cabinet that a provisional school capital programme budget of 8 million, which is set out in the report, is approved. And recommendation 1.2, that overview and scrutiny support the recommendation to Cabinet to approve the commencement of the procurement process in accordance with the Council and EU procurement procedures to appoint an architect-led multidiscipline designers and project teams for the next schools capital programme and appoint a principal contractors at the time when we're in that phase to take forward the proposed schemes. And as we go through the report, we'll talk about what those schemes are. So as I said, that the school capital programme is something that we do every year. We set a budget because at this stage we don't yet know what the cost is going to be for the works that we need to undertake in the relevant schools, because we're doing sort of feasibility studies at the moment. Those feasibility studies will inform us of what the project costs will be. So we give a sort of a figure, an round figure that we look to seek approval for. I won't go through a lot of the detail here because some of it is based on, what we've already talked about in the pupil place plan. So the big areas in this report really are Tilbury, which we've talked about, and Abbots Hall. And at the moment, we're in the process of scoping a feasibility study. Now, the Abbots Hall Primary were a 1.5 form entry, actually, school before, that dropped to a 1 form. So we now need to bring them back really to a 2 form entry, because as you will have seen in the pupil place plan, the need is rising. There are housing developments coming in and around that area and around that school. They are the only 1 form entry school in that area. And so it's, you know, it seemed right that that's the school that we look to expand their provision. So we're in the feasibility stage for that one. And in addition to that school, obviously we've already talked about Tilbury and needing to do some work in that area and already having those conversations with the GLC schools. So that's what the budget's for. It is for those two areas where we've got the most need. What that budget hopefully will also give us is some money to do any bulge classes as we go along. So because we don't know what those will be at the moment, you know, that budget allocation allows us to do some work from our basic, and that's from our basic needs budget from the Department for Education. Then just a quick update on our current schools capital programme. That consisted of 6 projects in Thurrock. Quite an extensive programme, nearly at conclusion. Within that programme, there was a new nursery at Corringham Primary School. We've done extensive work at St Clair Secondary School, who took quite a large bulge a couple of years in 2019. So, you know, we've had to expand them. That was an expansion. And also Benyon Primary School, they were formerly a 1-form entry. They will now they will become a 2-form entry. And that school came about because they'd had taken a number of bulge classes already. So when we look to do expansions, we look at how many bulge classes a school already has. So generally, if they've got 3 or more bulge classes, actually we need to expand that school if the land allows us to do that. And we take all of that into consideration at the time when we're looking at expansions. Just a quick update on temporary accommodation. So for this September, we did some quite extensive remodelling work of what is known as the Blue Box building, which is the Thurrock Learning Campus behind South Essex College. That building was previously the temporary accommodation for the college before the college opened. So what we looked to do, and actually what we've done, is utilise that building because it was in very good condition in order to open Thames Park in temporary accommodation. It was seen as a much more financial option to us to be able to do that because that building was already in situ and allowed us to open the temporary accommodation as quickly as we needed it. At the time now, the permanent sites will commence their works and be open in September 22. We also, in the last capital programme pot, provided temporary accommodation. Some of you may know where that is. That's up by the rugby club. And so that was completed, ready for new pupils to open, and that opened in this September. So both of those temporary accommodations took 120 pupils each. And in order for us to meet demand for places for September 2019, Treetops also had, so Treetops Special School also had a double demountable, very much needed places there. Again, you know, when we talk about provision, you know, when we talked about provision under the last report, you know, that's something that, you know, Michelle and actually Sheila and the whole team look at continually. So although that information might not have been built into the plan as extensively as, you know, committee members would have liked, actually that's very much on the radar. And, you know, we are looking at putting some additional temporary accommodation in there for early part of next year, which will be put in place before the free school comes online, before the permanent site. So that provision is very much taken into consideration at the same time as we look at our mainstream schools. That, I think, probably covers everything that we've talked about. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions now.
Thank you, Sarah. I will go back to Councillor Ockenardi. You had your hand up first. Councillor Ockenardi.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I've read this, and it is a necessity. It's not a question anyway. I mean, it's a necessity that we ensure that we have adequate provision. So obviously, I would ask. Be supporting this sort of recommendation that it goes through. That we make sure that we have, like I said, it's a statutory responsibility of the council, of the authority, and so it is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Okanadi. Councillor Muldowney, I think your hand was up next.
I think Sally just beat me to it, actually.
Okay, Sally, would you like to comment question?
Yeah, my main question is really, with looking at the provision of building extra buildings onto schools to increase capacity. Obviously, we couldn't have ever forecasted the COVID-19 situation. However, it's not going to go away overnight. We're going to be living with this virus for a long time. Therefore, currently, when we're looking at increasing capacity, are you considering the social distancing and the spacing that we never had to consider before? It really has turned schools on its head. When you're looking at schools that were built in the 60s that have 1,500 children in, we have no space for social distancing, adequate social distancing, just purely because the building size and also the amount of pupils. I'm just thinking, moving forward, are you now looking at that, thinking actually we may need to consider having a bit more space, because with this pandemic, it's brought a lot of things up that we weren't really considering. Well, we didn't need to, did we? But now it's here and it's not going to go away. I think it's something that we really need to be thinking about.
Yes, and thank you, Sally. It is something that we are constantly thinking about and taking into consideration, that when we are planning any expansion works, that actually there are big enough classroom spaces. Some of our primary schools that have been around for a very long time, maybe where they've been built a long time ago, maybe smaller, but actually we are considering how we build them and how big those rooms, and even building in some additional spaces for the social distancing.
Sally, would you like to come back on that?
No, just to say thank you very much for that, and it's good to know that you are actually thinking about it, because like I say, this virus isn't going to go away overnight, so we do need to be thinking ahead really of what's going to happen with the management of the capacity.
Thank you. Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sarah. I just wondered how much of this money is being procured from the EU?
The money is not from the EU. That's the part of the procurement process. The money actually is our basic needs that we get allocated, and is based on pupil numbers. So we get that money into the authority, and that pot is for capital programme only. So it only allows us to use it for capital building projects for schools.
Yeah. So,
but in terms of the EU and the procurement process, that's the part we have to make sure that we follow all of those procurement processes.
Right. Okay. So the money itself doesn't come from the EU. So presumably, when we finally leave at the end of this year, we won't need to do those EU procurement processes. Is that correct?
That I'm not entirely sure about. That's something I would have to check with procurement.
Okay, thanks. Yes, I mean, I agree with Councillor Okanadi. We clearly have a need for the building programme going forward. So I do support both recommendations. I think the missing element that maybe is going to trip us up as we go forward is about being able to predict housing, the amount of children that will come from housing developments. I know we had a talk about this earlier in the week. Obviously, we're sort of restricted there by government regulations about how many we can count coming from a housing development, and there needs to be a recognition, especially in areas like ours, I think, that we are now starting to see children coming from one-bedroom flats, even though we're not we wouldn't normally count children coming from one-bedroom flats. I just wondered, what is the process for actually, is there a process for being able to feed that back from local authorities to national government? Because it obviously sits with national government to change those regulations in the way that we're able to calculate school place need.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's something that would go, I can feed back through planning colleagues, and that's something that would probably go through them to feed that back to central government.
Thank you. Would you undertake to do that for us?
I will,
Sarah?
of course.
Thank you. That's good.
Thank you for that, Sarah. My question, in similar vein to Councillor Muldowney, I think Councillor Muldowney mentioned the difficulty in future development, and we spoke earlier in the meeting about children coming into the borough from abroad and from elsewhere within the country, and how difficult that is to predict. I mean, do we literally just have previous year's numbers to go on from that? Because you know, we are talking in the thousands per academic year, not hundreds of, you know, children that come into the borough part way through the year. I mean, this is a really large number. Do we not have anything other than just, you know, the numbers we've received from previous years to try and predict and forecast with this sort of thing?
Yes, we do, and so we do take on board housing developments that are coming through. And actually, we, as a, you know, one of the things that I do as in my team is respond to planning applications, and I'm quite, you know, I work quite closely with the planning team. So if there are housing developments coming on board, you know, we do the forecasting for the numbers so that we can then build that into, that data is built into our plans. But it's not just based on birth data. But of course, you never know from you know, a development or a property how many children are actually going to come out of that development. You can only base it on, you know, on the forecasting that we do. But I think we probably all know that some, you know, in some homes you get larger families than, you know, what you would normally get. So, for example, in the one-bedroom properties that we don't count, actually, you could get 2 parents and 2 children sometimes coming out of that one development.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. You did briefly hand up there, Councillor Muldowney, that answer. Was that a mistake, or do you have?
No, I thought I hadn't answered your question, but I think you might have been asking a different question. But on page 39, it's got all the numbers going back to 2014 of in-year children who've come in year that have needed a school place, and it's sort of it's, you know, about 1,200, I think.
My question was more sort of in addition to that, do we have any further data that helps us predict those in-year admissions going forward? But thank you for your answer,
No.
Sarah.
No. No, we don't, because we don't know what's going to, you know, until the application's made, we don't know, you know, we never know what families are going to move into Thurrock. That's not something you can ever predict. You can only, you know, work on, you know, school places for birth data and from development. So you don't actually ever know what families, you know, but, you know, there's lots of families that have moved in. So they clearly, you know, Thurrock is a great place to live.
Yes, definitely. I can't see any further hands up, so I'm happy to go to the recommendations, of which there are 2. Recommendation 1.1, I'm certainly had chance to and has read that recommendation. Are we happy to agree to recommendation 1.1? Yep, I see lots of nodding. And recommendation 1.2, are we happy to agree to recommendation 1.2? Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Well, I'm going to move on to the next item then, which is number 6, Thurrock Childcare Efficiency Annual Assessment. and I think this one's Michelle, isn't it, Michelle?
Well, I'm actually going to hand over to one of my colleagues. So Alison Picknell's on the line, and she leads for me around sort of our early years provision. So Alison, a warm welcome, and I'm going to hand over to you with this report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Michelle. Just to introduce myself then, I'm Alison Picknell, the School Effectiveness and Early Years Manager for the Council, and I'm here on behalf of Andrea and Michelle to give you this report. So I'm presenting this report for decision. Thurrock Council is required by law to report annually to elected council members on how they are meeting their duty to secure sufficient childcare and make this report available and accessible to parents. The council has prepared this report in order to meet this duty. Having sufficient childcare means that families are able to find childcare that meets their child's learning needs and enables parents to make a real choice about work and training. This applies to all children from birth to age 14 and to children with disabilities. Sufficiency is assessed for different groups rather than for all children in the local authority. We use information about childcare sufficiency to plan our work, supporting the local childcare economy. There are currently sufficient places for 2-year-old entitlement and universal places in Thurrock for 3- and 4-year-olds. The 30-year entitlement for working parents of 3- and 4-year-olds pre-COVID had an upward trend. I'd like to also mention that during the whole period of the pandemic, sufficient places have been available to match demand. So I have 3 recommendations with this report. 2.1, to support further early years and childcare development in the next 0 to 5 years in the West Thurrock, Purfleet-on-Thames areas, recognising the proposed strategic developments along with the additional large residential developments in Chadwell and East Tilbury. 2.2, that more schools and academies consider out-of-school provision, particularly in line with the right to request legislation, that schools and academies work in continued partnership with the LA in regard to the future move from 15-hour entitlement to 30 hours for eligible working parents of their 3- and 4-year-olds, and 2.3, the draft version of the Childcare Sufficiency Assessment 2020 is adopted. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. My question to begin with was, you know, this is an important report, and you mentioned in your presentation there that we're to make this available to parents, and I do think that's important. That you know, parents do have sight of this. How do we promote that? How do we ensure that it's made available to parents? They know that it's out there and there for them to view.
Right, I might need Michelle on this one because I actually came in quite late to represent Andrea on this one. But my understanding is that it's put on the website. Is that right, Michelle?
Yeah, let me help you out, Alison. And thank you, Alison. Alison has stepped in quite late because unfortunately Andrea's not able to attend. Yeah, it is publicised on the website. I think the other important thing is that because we've got such a strong early years team, because they're out in the communities, clearly working out of our children's centres and supporting our sort of private providers locally, there's quite a wide network, councillor, by which this information gets out to parents. Clearly, the other way it happens is it's on our local offer, so people can look up, and we get a lot of phone calls into the council, actually. So a parent will ring up and say, you know, my 2-year-old's coming up for, you know, placements, where are their opportunities? We're able to support with that. Or people are moving in, a bit like Sarah said, it's the same system with some of those early years places as well. People move in and, you know, they're ringing up to say, you know, where are the places? I think one of the things, and councillors may have already picked this up, but I think it's worth me saying, I think we've got a very strong early years offer. I think we've got some really good sort of private providers, and I'm really pleased to say that actually sort of over this whole time, as Alison pointed out, we had enough places for you know, the children that were, the parents that were requesting it. So I think that's a real strength actually. And again, early years provision is absolutely critical, because as we know, that early years engagement really does set children up for when they move into sort of like, you know, the next phase on into reception and year one. So, and again, just picking up again, if I may, sorry, I'm taking a bit of time here, aren't I, Councillor? But I'll just one more point, really. I think the other point to make is, and it absolutely lends itself again to the partnership working. So, you know, the work we're doing, Sarah spoke to you about the new nursery in Corringham. The new nursery at Corringham Primary will take 2-, 3- and 4-year-olds. And I think that shows the commitment on behalf of the local authority around the importance of that very early sort of years intervention, but also the partnership arrangements with the schools. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Councillor Muldowney, you've got your hand up. Would you like to comment or question?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I've only got one recommendation in my pack. Don't know if that's so. I've got 1.1 that Children's Services ONS note the annual childcare sufficiency assessment. So, but I heard there was 3 recommendations from the person who spoke. But
yes.
I'm going to need those repeated at some point to understand what you're asking us to recommend.
Okay, I may have used the wrong recommendations. I may not have sight of what you have, so apologies for that, Councillor.
Right, okay.
I can repeat.
That would be good if I could get a rough.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so 2.1 is to support further early years and childcare development in the next 0 to 5 years in the West Thurrock, Purfleet-on-Thames areas, recognising the proposed strategic developments proposed, along with additional large residential developments in the Chadwell East Tilbury area. 2.2, that more schools and academies consider the out-of-school provision, particularly in line with the right to request legislation, that schools and academies work in continued partnership with the local authority in regard to the future move from 15 hours entitlement to 30 hours for eligible working parents of their 3- and 4-year-old pupils. And then the one that you're saying that you have, which is the draft version of the Childcare Sufficiency Assessment 2020, is adopted. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's helpful. I gave you a rough idea what we're looking at. I think what was missing for me here was a real appreciation of the impact of this sector, of COVID on this sector. I was reading an Early Years Alliance report that said that 1 in 6 nurseries and childminders fear they could close by Christmas if their income doesn't rise. I think saying that we had enough places during the COVID pandemic is missing the point a little bit, because part of the reason why early years provision is under threat is because there was hardly any take up during the first lockdown, and there's been a reduced take up with people coming back after that. So I think what I would have liked to have seen was a little bit more analysis in this report of whether in Thurrock we're going to have a problem with nurseries and private childcare, childminders, etc., actually going out of business and not being able to carry on, and what impact that's going to have for our childcare provision. I mean, before COVID, there was already a problem with the underfunding of the 30 hours offer. And I think just to put it onto schools, for them to be providing the sort of out of school hours provision is not going to be enough to make up a shortfall if we're going to lose a quarter of our, or 1 in 6, or a substantial amount of our nurseries and childminders who are really suffering from at the moment. A lot of these places didn't qualify for furloughing of staff. I don't know how much that's impacted us in Thurrock. I would have liked to have seen something about that. In a lot of these businesses couldn't take advantage of the small business loans because they don't pay business rates. so they're excluded from that. And I think it's a real time bomb that's going to go off when the economy does reopen again. Are we going to have enough places to be able to deliver the provision that we need to deliver in this area? That's my big question.
Okay.
I think I'd like to see something coming back that actually addressed those questions.
Yep. Okay. What I can do is certainly take that back to the team and the author of the assessment. What I can see is that the early years officers that work within the school effectiveness team have worked extremely closely with the providers, the PVI providers. We are working very closely with them, literally weekly in contact with them, supporting them in all sorts of different ways to support their sustainability. But yeah, I will certainly take that point back. Thank you, Councillor. Michelle, do you want to comment on that at all?
I mean, just to echo really what you've said, I mean, I wouldn't want to give committee the wrong impression. This, again, needs to be a very mixed economy across the whole of Thurrock. So if I gave the impression that it was just down to schools, then that's absolutely not the case. It has to be very much a mixed economy of a number of private providers, what schools can offer, what childminders offer, because you're absolutely right, Councillor Moldovi, that's an absolutely critical part to the whole system in relation to, you know, how we're looking after our sort of very little children. I think what, again, I'm hearing, and again, happy to bring this back to committee, is more information around what actually is going on in early years and what that looks like. What I can say to you is that the council passported out all the monies that it could to all of our early years providers. So the council were very proactive. We got that money out incredibly quickly so that we were ensuring that we were stabilising the market, because as you said, you know, some parents were still quite nervous. That's starting to come back slowly, but the council did passport out the money around early years as quickly as it possibly could, recognising that we needed to stabilise the system, because as you quite rightly say, Councillor Muldowney, we need to be monitoring and watching this one very, very carefully, because actually our early years outcomes are very strong because of all the systems we've got in place. Now, if we're going to start getting, it's going to become an unstable market, we need to pick that up quite quickly. So again, point well made. We need to go back and make sure that we're looking at that. Thank you.
And if I could just make another point, thank you. Just to say that we, for the spring term, we followed the government guidance, and all our early years nursery provision received, if it looked as though they were going to receive less than they did in the autumn term 2019, we match funded that. So basically the funding that we were given, as Michelle is absolutely right, the funding that we were given went straight back out to provision. So no early years provision received less this term than they did in 2019. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison.
That's really reassuring to hear that. I still would like for a report to come back to see to look at what the impact is moving forward. I'd take advice on what timeline there should be for that. And I absolutely accept that the fault doesn't lie with the council if childcare organisations are going out with business. I do appreciate all the hard work that you're doing with our schools and with our early years providers, but they're already on the edge because of the underfunding of the 30 hours free placements. So unfortunately COVID has come and impacted on that, but no fault of the council, just to make that clear. That's absolutely true.
If I may just make one other point, is that being involved obviously with all the early years across the sector, so from the school provision through to childminders through to nurseries and preschools, I think one of the absolute positives that has come out across Thurrock during the pandemic is the way the whole sector has absolutely worked together, that we've created documents that everyone is using together, and that's been working parties of schools and childminders and preschool managers and practitioners. It's really strengthened what was always I would say, amazing within Thurrock, the early years sector, but it's absolutely strengthened it. And the sort of co-working, the joint working has been incredible to see. So I'm pleased I'm able to share that point with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison.
Great. Hope that stands us in good stead as we move forward. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you, Councillor.
And Michelle, can we get an undertaking on your part to go away and think about providing a report in future on this?
Absolutely, Councillor. I mean, we just need to look at the work plan, don't we, and build it in. So yeah, that's not a problem at all. I think that'd be really helpful to bring back to committee. Actually, I think it's about the timelines, and I want to think about the timelines to bring it back so that it's a helpful report and we can see where we are. But no, that's absolutely fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Akinade.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm going to still be talking about the 3 to 4 year olds that are given, I mean, the 30 hours entitlement for 3 to 4 year olds. And it's the report is saying, I mean, the way I understand it is that not many schools are taking up this offer, or not many schools are offering this to parents. I mean, that's the way I read this report. And I look at 30 hours, it's like 6 hours a day for a child. So how realistic is that we expect schools to provide that, you know, rather than a separate provider? Because we're talking about 3 to 4 year olds, not from 5, which is like statutory primary school children, but we're talking about like nursery school, and we expect the schools to make this provision, and yet we would have to encourage schools to do it. But I do understand that parents, particularly parents of 2-parent family that have to go back to work, even if they have to work at home or work from home, they still need support to care for their children. So I just sort of need more information, like how did we expect this to work?
Okay, I can certainly take that back for you, Councillor, and maybe that can be something that can be brought back at a later point, if that's okay. Michelle, is there anything you would like to add?
I mean, I think it's a really a point well made. I think the private providers are geared up for the sort of the 30 hours. So, you know, but I think for schools, you're quite right, Councillor Akinade, it's a different system, isn't it? And it works in a different way. I think what's interesting, what I'm hearing from schools is that they're recognising that the earlier they get these children into their system, then they can work with them right the way through their system, particularly some of these trusts that, you know, I've got, if they can start taking children at 2 and putting them right the way through the system. But clearly that comes with, I mean, we all recognise that if you've got a 2-year-old, the ratio of staff is very different than if you've got a sort of a 3 and a 4-year-old. So I think there's a whole number of factors. I think what we will be looking to do is work closely with our schools to see what they can offer. But I wouldn't want this to be based just on schools, Councillor. As Councillor Muldowney said, it's not just about schools. We've got childminders, we've got private providers. There's a whole, there really is, you know, quite a large group offering sort of early years provision. So I think what I'll probably do, if I can, Councillor, I'll dovetail that into the work that Councillor Muldowney is talking about. We can just bring it into that report as to how people are looking at the sort of 30 hours and what that's looking like. Would that work?
Councillor Akinade? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. That would be fine. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Akinade. Councillor Rigby, would you like to comment or question? Councillor Rigby, I don't know if you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear you then. Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's just a quick question, please. Just moving on a bit from what Councillor Akinade was saying. I know a lot of the issues around providing the 15 or 30 hours nursery care can be on the amount of payment that the providers receive, and I just wondered if that was still an issue with regards to them getting, you know, less money from the actual sort of entitled hours to parents that are, you know, paying extra, you know, from outside that. If that is that still an issue with places that are, you know, willing to provide these places?
I mean, you're absolutely right. Oh, sorry, Alison, apologies.
No, go for it, Michelle, go for it.
You're absolutely right. It is a real challenge around the sort of funding that's allocated. And actually, that you're again right, when it becomes the entitlement children get a set amount of funding, which is set by central government, that's the funding. Whereas if it's private, if you've got parents that are paying, it works in a different way. So I'm afraid that is still there. What I do know is, and I think Councillor Moldovi sort of alluded to this, that, you know, the national infrastructure groups around early years are really lobbying government incredibly hard in relation to this, and they're sort of asking the question really about, you know, we really do need to look at this funding, but it's in an environment where lots of funding issues are being looked at, isn't it? So you're quite right, Councillor Rigby. What most private providers do, to be honest, is they do a mix. So they'll take some entitlement children, then they'll take some that are sort of parents fee paying. So that's what makes the model work for them. But it's a challenging model. It really is. It would be wrong of me not to say it wasn't. It's a challenging business model.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Councillor Rigby, would you like to come back on that at all?
No, only to say that clearly if there is some way of getting the extra funding through, it would help parents of those that aren't privately paying to get places. But I know it's an ongoing issue tied up with other things, but that would be obviously a good way forward if possible.
Okay, brilliant. I can't see any further hands up, so I'm going to go to the recommendations. I think they're going to have to be read out one by one again. Alison,
Yep. May I just check with Michelle that she has the same recommendations in front of her as I do?
I don't, and my recommendation is, colleagues, I think it's on the chat actually. Wendy's made a very good point of you know, reference. We need to just agree the recommendation that went out in the pack. So I think, Councillor, it will be the recommendation, the 1.1, which was what went out in the pack. So I think that's what's on the chat. Wendy, sorry, I'm taking over your role here, aren't I? Apologies.
Yeah, I was going to ask Wendy if would you like to comment on that? Let us know.
Yes, Chair. So, committee members, what needs to be agreed is the recommendation that's been published in the pack, which is that Children's Services ONS note the annual childcare sufficiency assessment 2020. Yeah, because that's the published recommendation, unless committee members themselves wish to change the recommendations for whichever reason. Okay.
Okay. Well, I mean, we'll go to that recommendation 1.1. I'm happy to agree that. Is everyone else happy to agree that? Yeah. Oh, Wendy, are we able to somehow sort of bring on the other three recommendations if someone proposes them and vote on them as well? Because if you know they were supposed to be on there, I would like to vote on them.
Yes, Chair. So members can bring in these recommendations themselves, and as long as everyone agrees to those recommendations. So if Chair, if you are to propose, then is for members to agree to that as well.
Okay. Well, I've been told that they're in the chat. So as outlined in the chat, are members happy to agree those three recommendations? Councillor Moldoni?
I don't think they are in the chat, are they?
No, sorry. So the recommendations, members. So Chair, if you are proposing them, then you would need to read out the recommendations to clarify for the recording, basically.
Okay, well, I'd like to propose the three recommendations, Wendy, but I didn't write them down when they were read out earlier. is...
Would you like me to read them again? Apologies. And apologies if I've got the wrong paperwork. As I say, I came in quite late, so the paperwork that I had with me, I assumed was correct. So profuse apologies on that part.
No worries, Alison. Can you read them really slowly so I can?
Yes, of course, of course. Okay, so to support further early years and childcare development in the next 0 to 5 years in the West Thurrock, Purfleet-on-Thames areas, recognising the proposed strategic developments proposed, along with additional large residential developments in Chadwell and East Tilbury. That's the first one.
Could you put them in the chat as well, Wendy, if you can type them out perhaps a bit quicker than we can write?
Would you like me to type them in the chat as we sort of move on? Would that be helpful?
Sorry, Chair, these will be in the minutes, but I think putting it in the chat, the public won't see this.
I'd just like to put it in the chat so I can go on the chat and read them, because instead of having them read out and me write them down, I just think it would be a lot easier if they were quickly typed in the chat and then I can read them.
Okay, I'll try.
Would you like me to pop them in the chat as I have that paper?
Do you have your hand up?
Yes, okay, Alison, if that's easier, if you're able to copy and paste it over. I think Councillor Okanada's had her hand up for a while, Chair.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. I was going to say that what is being said here is there's highlighted bits before the recommendation, and that looks like, it's saying that Thurrock Council will continue to support further early years and childcare development. That's A onto D. And I thought that that is what the officer are saying they're doing. But in terms of ourselves as councillor, the recommendation that we are, should be agreeing to is the 1.1. We say that Children's Services ONS note this annual sufficiency assessment 2020, and because that is what is published and that is clear enough, and then the other bit is like it's in the report as to what the council proposed to carry on doing. So that is my suggestion, that we just accept the recommendation 1.1.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying there, Councillor. They're on page 117, just under Thurrock Council will continue. Yeah, I hadn't realised that they were there. I mean, in that case, if committee's happy to, I'm happy with those in the report, as Councillor Okanadi says, just to agree as we have recommendation 1.1 and move on. Is everyone happy to do that?
Yeah.
I'm happy to do that as long as we get the other report as well. I don't know if that needs to be noted in the minutes or as a recommendation or whatever.
If that can be noted in the minutes, Wendy, that would be great.
Yes, it is noted in the minutes and it'll be on the work programme.
Fantastic. Well, with that, we can move on to item 7 then, which is the Inspire 2019-2020 report. It can be found on page 151. And Michelle, are you leading on this one?
I am indeed, Councillor. Thank you. Thank you very much, colleagues. This is the annual report of Inspire. Inspire is our integrated youth offer. Its age range is 16 to 19 and up to 25 if someone's got a disability. And it brings together all of our youth offer across Thurrock. It leads on the work we do around employability and skills. So it leads on the work we do in relation to careers advice. It leads on the work around apprenticeships. It leads on working with very vulnerable groups of learners, so some of our SEND learners, some of our care leavers. It also brings together a range of other opportunities, one of those being Head Start Housing, which is our successful programme of supporting care leavers with accommodation as they prepare to move into, independent living. It also looks at the work we do in relation to Grange Waters. So our Grange Waters, our outdoor education offer, and also brings together all of our youth offer. So it really is our integrated youth hub. I wanted to pick out some sort of key bits actually. You will see in the report that actually on page 152, if you look at 2.4, again, Thurrock has done very well at the end of September. Our NEAT figures, that is young people not in education, employment or training, 16 to 18 was 2.5%, and that was compared with 6.2% nationally and 7% against our statistical neighbours. I think that was, you know, a positive piece of work by the team. I wanted to pick up because I think one of the things that we've talked about in other committees to do with other cohorts of learners actually is the work we've done during COVID. So I think it's important to recognise that actually the youth team have been offering online support and detached support. Grange Waters has been open to work with some of our very vulnerable learners, particularly offering things to Olive Academy, which is our you know, pupil referral unit down in Tilbury. So again, coming back around that sort of partnership work and partnership development, there is no doubt, and we've picked this up in previous committee meetings, that young people are going to be disproportionately impacted around COVID, around employment opportunities. I've just had the recent figures around 18 to 24-year-olds who are claiming benefit, and you know, the figures, we're higher than national, so you know, we have got some sort of issues there. Clearly, as I've said, Inspire's looking at the 16 to 19 and up to 25 with disabilities. However, our successful On Track programme, which was looking at working with young people from 16 to 30, and that was an ESF programme actually, Councillor, that was a European Social Fund programme. We've had notification that there is further opportunities for us because of the success of phase 1, for us to be considered for some further funding, which will pick up this, you know, 18 to 24-year-olds who really have been impacted quite significantly in relation to COVID. I would like to request, actually, I don't really want to fill the work programme, but actually there are some key things here. I think it would be good to bring back to committee. We did a review, we did the annual review of Head Start earlier this week. That is a joint piece of work between ourselves and Housing, and has proved very, very successful. I would like to take the opportunity to bring something back to committee in more detail around Head Start. The team have produced a really great video showing the properties that our young people are living in and actually what that integrated offer looks like. So if committee felt that was something they wanted to see, I'm happy to put that sort of on the work programme. I think the issue with me about Inspire, I could talk for a long time about all of the work that's going on. You've got the report. I think at that point, I'll just open it sort of up for questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the report, Michelle. Obviously, as you say, you know, Inspire is our sort of broad, you know, offer to youth here in Thurrock. It encompasses a lot of things. I mean, just a couple there. You know, we give them skills to develop employability, and the youth and outdoor team developed confidence, etc. One of the skills that I think is really important, and I was wondering if we did any of this, is sort of personal financial responsibility and the ability to manage personal finances. I wondered if we did any of that within this our Inspire umbrella.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually, and it's an area that's really quite something very close to the heart of Councillor Hebb. So Councillor Hebb has done some work around supporting some programmes around financial management, how you manage finances. That's run by Thurrock Adult Community College, which sort of sits within, you know, the whole suite of services. And we've rolled that programme out in schools. We've also looked to work with our more vulnerable learners around that. So, you know, very practical skills, actually. I'm very conscious there's another councillor that used to sit on ONS that used to raise financial literacy all the time, was a passionate believer in making sure that, you know, I can see colleagues smiling because they'll know who I'm talking about. So passionate believer in sort of financial management. So yes, they do offer that, linked to Thurrock Adult Community College. And I think that's really one of the benefits of this integrated offer, because we're able to bring all of those things together. And clearly our young people who are not in education, employment or training have also had the opportunity to access some of that training. So yes, I think part of the challenge is preparing a report for committee that gives you a flavour of what we're doing, but you know, there's lots of other things sort of underneath that really. So, but just to reassure you, yes, that is part of the offer.
Well, that's fantastic to hear, because I do think that's very important. My only other question, and I don't know if I've missed anything further on, but paragraph 2.10 mentions 3 properties that will be purchased and modified for exclusive use by care leavers. It talks about the first property in Grays should be ready early November. It talks about the second property, South Ockenden, should be ready early January 2021. I can't see a mention of the third property. Is that not purchased yet, or?
It's not purchased yet. We're in that hybrid position of an offer's gone in, but we're just waiting for the information to come back. I think, as I said, I'd really like to bring further information back for committee, because, you know, the council have invested heavily in this. They've invested in the purchase of properties for Head Start to support our care leavers. And I think, you know, if committee felt it would be helpful, I'd like to bring something back about Head Start, because actually talking as a cross-directorate piece of work, it's a really good example of cross-directorate between children's services and housing. So I think housing ONS would also, I think, like to see the report. But again, that's down to committee. That's your decision.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for this report. It was very interesting to hear about all the different streams of work that you're doing with young people in the area. And it was very, very interesting, very encouraging to read that. And I thank you for acknowledging that, as you know, we are heading into a time where already it's very, very difficult for our young people to find employment. Obviously, as you said, they've been disproportionately hit by COVID. The industries that young people tend to work in have been hit worse than the hospitality industries, etc. What I think was missing from me in this report was, for each of these streams, well, actually, before I come on to that, obviously I've looked at the figures for just to give an idea to the committee of the situation that we're going to be facing. Is that in January 2020, youth unemployment for aged 18 to 24-year-olds was 4.5%, and in October that had jumped to 11.3%. When you look at the age group from 18 to 21, it's even higher at 12.1%, the latest figures. So that's really, really significant levels of unemployment. Also, there's been a significant hit to apprenticeships. I would have liked, I think I would have liked to have seen more analysis of the situation that's facing our young people and how we're going to respond to that. Having said that, I have to say that, you know, like with the health service, we probably can't thank you enough within the council, within the education service, all of our public servants that have kept things running, kept our children educated during this really difficult time. But I do think that we need to be very realistic about the situation we're finding ourselves in now, and particularly with regard to our young people. So one thing I would have liked to have seen in the report is, for example, if we look at 2.5 about successfully applied and awarded external funding with National Apprenticeship Service and running those programmes, it all sounds great, and I'm sure it has been of benefit, but what actual difference has that made on the ground to our young people? This is the element that I feel is missing. We're missing the analysis of. Yes, we've got very good figures. The only figures in there, we've got very good figures in terms of our young people who are not in education training. That's where we do fall below the national average. But for pretty much every other indicator, we are above the national average in these areas. I would have liked to have seen, for example, what is the hit that we're taking in terms of apprenticeships in Thurrock? I mean, I've been able to find national figures and they're looking pretty grim. I think apprenticeship starts in May 2020 was 60% less than the previous year. So not only are there more people competing for more jobs, and a bigger proportion of them are going to be young people, but also the training courses aren't there either. What's happening with how secure is our college funding? Because I'm hearing that as a national problem, there's a lot of insecurity with college funding, and there's not really an understanding of whether extra funds are coming to support that. So I would have liked to have seen those kind of things. And for each of the, I mean, it sounds as if we're doing all the right things, but the best advice, information and guidance in the world isn't really going to help anybody, for example, if there's just no jobs. I did see that Inspire started to work with the Kickstarter scheme, which initially sounded good, 2 billion that's been set aside for that. However, there are concerns about this. The government has said that it's created nearly 20,000 new jobs, but I think we need to be clear that these aren't new jobs. These are 6 month employment schemes. They are fully funded at minimum wage for 25 hours, which is good. But there is some concern about whether there'll be a bigger take up of those, which don't have to lead to a qualification or a job at the end of it, a bit like the old YTS schemes. So I think it's a bit of a misnomer to think that we can rely on Kickstarter schemes to solve our problems. The other problem with the Kickstarter scheme, when I looked into it, because some of my voluntary agencies were like, that's great, we'd love a young person to come and design our website for 25 hours a week. But then we found that an organisation has to be big enough to take on 30 placements or nothing. So there's nothing in between. A group of companies can actually come together and take on those 30 placements between them, but that's obviously, and there are funds that you can draw down to administer that, but that is obviously, that is going to be an obstacle for a lot of very small voluntary sector, which could have really benefited from that scheme. So I'm a little bit, I must sound quite cynical about what the impact of the Kickstarter schemes are going to be. I would have preferred more support for apprenticeships. We're already getting falling numbers of apprenticeships since we changed over to the apprenticeship levy. Obviously, COVID has come and really kicked that 60% down. And most of those are in the younger age bracket, under 24s rather than the over 25s. So I'm just wondering, well, there is talk that that people will be able to go back and spend an extra year in college. But then again, we've got this uncertainty about whether the funding's actually going to be there to make our colleges secure. So I think it's great that you're doing this work. I can see that you're doing some really fantastic work, but I think what I'd like to see come back to Scrutiny so that we can actually provide some value for our young people is a really honest look at what the situation is because of COVID and how we're going to try and meet that if we are able. I mean, I understand the council doesn't have endless resources, but perhaps that's something that we can do within Scrutiny to actually have a look at ideas about how we're going to actually meet this problem. Because I think, like the early years situation, this is going to be an area that's going to be a major issue going forwards.
Michelle, would you like to come back on that?
Yes, please, if I can. First of all, again, points very well made, Councillor. I think on the Kickstart programme, I think the hope is, and I hear what you're saying, the hope is that it will provide that work placement for 6 months that may then provide an opportunity. I think what I'm getting from some firms, not all, and you know, I want to be very honest with committee here, but I am getting with some firms, because don't forget we work very closely with employers, to say, look, we think if we can just have this for 6 months, we think we might be able to sort of re-energise and get some apprentices back. Clearly, there'll be some companies that can't do that, and sadly, there'll be some companies that, unfortunately, you know, probably will not continue for all sorts of reasons. An example of Kickstart, actually, we were talking this week to one of our academy trusts. They're going to do a Kickstart programme. They're going to recruit 30, you know, people into their trust. And they're saying at the end of it, they have got employment opportunities. They have got roles that, you know, that they can look to take people into, which is a great idea. And both Sheila and myself actually were talking about this, and we want to get this out to the wider sort of trust to see if that's a possibility. This is an area that actually Councillor Howden is very involved in. So there's an economic, you know, vulnerability task group actually, but still linking in with what we can do about sort of youth sort of unemployment. So, and I was on the call today with a senior colleague from DWP who tells me that they're working very closely with the health service, and the health service are saying that they've got a number of opportunities. But I think, Councillor Muldowney, the key here is making sure that our young people have got the right skill set to be able to get into these opportunities when they arrive. So when you talk about training providers, we're working really hard with a number of training providers that we've worked with for a while who are able to draw down funding to support some of that skills work. Clearly, you'd expect me to say this. For me, the other key area is about SEND, is about our vulnerable groups. And I'm delighted to say that actually, you know, Thurrock Council are looking to support some of our vulnerable groups with some supported internships, which hopefully will lead to apprenticeship programmes. And I think it's really important as, you know, a large employer that we're doing whatever we can, even though we know that we've got really challenging sort of economic times. I think coming back to your question about voluntary sector groups, I'm really interested in that one actually, because I know that the Council for Voluntary Services and CVS locally have been looking to see what they can do as the infrastructure organisation, because they recognise, as you say, and actually fantastic opportunities for young people if they can get into some of these small voluntary sort of organisations. So they were looking to see what they could do as part of that umbrella. So I'm quite happy if you'd like to email me outside committee, Councillor, with some of that information, and I can make sure it's passed on. Or you may have already done that, but it's just an offer of support if that would be helpful.
Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, I do think that we should take advantage of the Kickstarter scheme as it's there. I'm a little bit dubious about whether it's actually going to translate into long-term employment, and I'm a little bit worried about, unfortunately, because it's a better resourced offer than the apprenticeships, whether it's unintentionally going to actually cause more problems with apprenticeships, which are really a better long-term solution for people to retrain and get back into employment. However, you know, yeah, I mean, talking to the voluntary agencies that I'm in contact with, what they need is somebody who will take on the role. And as I say, there are funds that you can draw down from government to administer the placements. They need somebody who will take on that role and take on 30 placements, which can then be that will be a pool of people. So, but yes, absolutely, NHS vacancies obviously are still very high, even though there's some recruitment's been good. COVID's actually been good for something in terms of NHS recruitment. That's a great stream to bring online. And very interesting what you're saying about academies, because and the council, obviously, because the public sector is obviously one of the most stable sectors at the moment in terms of employment. So yes, that does sound as if you're thinking in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Michelle, would you like to come back on that?
No, that's absolutely fine. I think, you know, as I said, if there is any way, if Councillor Muldowney wants to send me some of that information, I'm happy to do that with CVS. I know that they're thinking about it. And as you say, with the trust, we're making sure that that's to a wider platform, sort of NHS and wherever else we can sort of identify opportunities, we'll be looking to see what we can do. Thank you, Councillor Anderson.
Councillor Rigby?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was just with your earlier comment about how in Thurrock the 18 to 24-year-olds claiming benefits is higher than the national average. I'm just wondering why that is, because on the whole, the North has been affected more economically by COVID. So I just wondered why Thurrock particularly has been affected in that way, if you know.
I think there are a number of factors. Clearly, we've got quite a large retail opportunity locally, and clearly retail has been sort of impacted quite significantly. And actually retail in that age group is quite high. So, you know, and things like the sort of the coffee shops, all of that type, that sort of economy. So that will be sort of some of the reason. I think the other thing that is interesting for me, and again, I want to do a bit more analysis about this, because it'd be interesting for me to see if in that group, and I suspect there is, although I need to test this out, there'll be young people that have finished their degree. So there'll be young people there that are coming back to Thurrock that have completed their degree, and it becomes incredibly difficult, doesn't it? Which is why we want to make sure that we're targeting sort of like support to sort of all of those different sort of like, you know, categories within the whole sort of spectrum. I think the other thing, you know, is that we talk about retail, don't we? We talk about sort of, you know, that sort of wider sector, but also I think some of those smaller companies that, you know, we know are going to really struggle. I think they're having to make some really difficult decisions now, which is impacting on that age group as well. So I think there's not one answer, Councillor Rigby. It's a range of things coming together at the same time as a result of, as we've said all evening, actually, a global pandemic that no one could have predicted, really. You know, we weren't expecting to be facing sort of, you know, a national health crisis as far as, you know, a global pandemic with the virus. So, yeah, there'll be a range of issues. I think that the key for us, though, is to make sure that we're looking at what's available, like the NHS opportunities, like what's going on in the academy trusts, like some of the employers I speak to are saying, look, you know what, Michelle, we might be able to, we're hoping that in 6 months' time, so if we take someone on Kickstart, we're hoping that some of that will translate into, because I absolutely agree with Councillor Muldowney, apprenticeships are, you know, a great way, you know, for you to earn and learn. You know, as I say, they're a great opportunity.
Thank you, Michelle. Councillor Rigby, do you want to come back on that at all?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I can't see any further hands up, so I'm going to go to the recommendations. Recommendation 1.1 there. Presume everyone's had time to read. Can we agree to that? Yeah, looks as though we can. And recommendation 1.2. Again, I can see nodding heads. Good. So that was the last report. We now just move on to the work programme. That can be found on page 159. Do I have any further comments from any committee members on the work programme? Doesn't look as though I do. Obviously, you know, a few things have been mentioned tonight, and you know, I'll have those discussions with democratic services and with officers, and I'm sure we'll get some of that stuff back, perhaps in the new year. But with that, I'm happy to end this meeting unless there's any outstanding business anyone wants to raise. No? Okay. Well, thank you for attending this evening's extraordinary meeting, everyone. And I'm going to close it at 8:45.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Good night.
you. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.